My name is Vicky Lockhart. I'm here from the International Well Building Institute, the IWBI, that are the partners for this hub. So we're really excited to bring you these 3 days of programming. Do come back and check out the other sessions we've got lined up. Some really fantastic speakers from amazing companies all coming together to talk to you about this topic. I'm also going to be joined by Mona Holtkotter, my colleague. Mona and I are both part of IWBI's Europe team. I'm based here in London and Mona is over in Dublin. And we are generally supporting this region with the engagement in healthy buildings and well projects. So super excited to be with you today. And we're going to kick off with a kind of overview. What is well? Where has it come from? We're going to dive into the current new version of the standard, which is well version 2. We're going to look at summaries of what are the key headlines, how is that different from the first program that launched in 2014, and then wrap up with a bit of a global overview. So what's happening across the world and here in Europe when it comes to well and healthy buildings. So just to kick off, and for a brief show of hands of who we've got here in the audience today, can you put your hand up if you've heard of well? Fantastic, good. So we've got a good baseline knowledge and familiarity with the program. Can you put your hand up if you've actually worked on a project that's tracking well? Fewer, perfect. Okay, great. So you're in the right place. This is the perfect session for you. We will be covering some basics, so we're not assuming that you have a knowledge of this already. And please do save up your questions for the end. We've got Q&A towards the end of this session when you can ask our team any of your burning questions. So this is the first of me doing a silent presentation, and I'm going to try and actually interact with you. We're going to see how this goes. So my first question for you all, what does it mean when we're talking about health? One of the very points of feedback, common points of feedback we get is that health and well-being as two topics are very big nebulous terms, and lots of people have different definitions and understandings of what it is we're fundamentally talking about. So is anyone going to be brave enough to put up their hand, and Mona will come with a microphone to capture what is it that you think of when we're talking about health? What does that word mean to you? What are you expecting to learn about here? Anyone going to kick us off? Be brave. I promise I'm not scary. Perfect.
I think it's about feeling good in yourself, and that's both mind and physically in an environment in which you work.
I see the limitations of this system because I can't hear you. That's where I need a headset. Okay, perfect. Test 1, fail. 1 second, please. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, perfect. Okay,
I said I think it's about feeling good about yourself, both physically and mentally, within an environment in which you either work or live.
Fantastic definition. Amazing. Anyone else want to add any other parameters that weren't covered by that already? We've got health, well-being, we're talking about environment, physical, social, mental. Okay, perfect. So from our perspective at IWBI, how we think about health is that really broad spectrum, complete state. So health, sometimes people think about diagnosable conditions, they think about disease, what you might be going to your doctor for, thinking about treatments and ailments and diagnoses. Well-being is often associated with this kind of positive spectrum beyond that. So what makes the difference between a kind of average, fine day, I'm functional, I'm up and running, and like a really fantastic day when you're on top of it, you're really feeling like you're performing at your best, and that really positive state of thriving. So that is the spectrum of health and well-being that we're talking about here, and it's not just this absence of disease, this middle state. Then if we think about here in the UK, we're here in London today. Another quick show of hands, who is based here in London or the UK and working in this market? Great. And who is working more broadly afield, so UK and other countries as well? Perfect, so a few of you. So for this presentation, we've pulled together what are the key health challenges in the UK specifically. We do have resources that look more broadly afield, but just for the purposes of today and being here at futurebuild, focusing in on the UK. So does anyone want to hazard a guess at what the top health factors might be that people are facing when it comes to their own personal state of health? Any guesses? Yeah? Perfect. Mona's coming with the microphone.
Definitely stress.
Stress, mental health, perfect. And that's a really good example of one that's influenced by our surroundings and our behavior and our context as well. So if we look at the public health research, actually the top modifiable risk factors, so these are the factors which are elements that we can control and influence, and are being tracked by public health communities. We've got smoking up there, number one. This is a very widely known health risk factor. We all know smoking is bad for us, and yet it's still a very common habit and behavior in the world. And then there's others that start delving much more into broader lifestyle habits. So high blood pressure, that is impacted by your activity levels, it's impacted by what you're choosing to consume and eat on a daily basis. High body mass index as well. These are much broader lifestyle conditions that are impacted by a number of different ranges and choices that we're making on a daily basis. If we look very broadly, you'll see this list gets really long. It's worth pointing out these are the factors that are tracked in metrics by the public health community. So this isn't an absolutely exhaustive list of everything in your environment that can impact your health, but it is the ones that the public health community are tracking and able to measure and report on. And this is the broad category of hierarchy. So the UK needs to start thinking about tackling smoking, high blood pressure, high body mass index, and that would have a huge benefit when it comes to public health. These two charts that we've just shown you have come from a new suite of resources called Country Briefs. So this has been a new initiative from our research team at IWBI to really delve into the public health resources that exist, translate them and make them accessible to members of the built environment and other practitioners that want to learn more about it. I myself, I'm an architect by training. I have worked as a sustainability consultant with engineers and architects and contractors who are looking to optimize their impacts, but I don't have any formal training in health and medicine and public health and that dimension of this. So these new resources are really helpful to give you the language and the tools to be able to understand and start to prioritize different interventions or different decisions within your projects that relate to broad national challenges in your different contexts. We have a total of 17 different countries for which we've produced these guides, the UK being one of them, and there is also some more general aggregated ones that look at countries by their socio-demographic index, SDI, so whether you're kind of high, middle income, low income countries. Do check out those resources, they're available on our website. So Health and Wellbeing International Well Building Institute. Why is it that we're talking about buildings when we're thinking about health? And the main reason for that is that we're spending so much time in indoor spaces. We spend 90% of our time indoors on average. And you can think about this relative to your own day-to-day. How much time have you spent outside in the fresh air looking at the sky, not underground in a tube network or inside this space listening to different sessions? Break that down into hours, work it out as a percentage of your day, and you'll see that it's a vanishingly small amount. This is very typical for all of us. And if we think about humans as organisms and how we've actually evolved to live and adapt and interact with our world, that's very counterintuitive to what our biology and physiology has been developed for. So we know that our context is really influential. We know that when we're in a space where it is easy to grab great fresh tasting food that's affordable, or where we're encouraged to get around and move around, we do more steps in a day. We know that our context influences our behaviors, and our behaviors are impacting our overall health choices. This is the nexus that IWBI exists in. We provide the guidance, the research insights for you to be able to make those different design and operation decisions so that you can optimize your projects when it comes to health outcomes. If we look to public health again, about what constitutes an individual state of health at any one time, you can see that physical and social environment plays a huge role. Certainly the first time that I ever saw this chart, it was really surprising to me. My assumption had always been that it's your genetics or the quality of your doctor that really were most influential in my personal state of health. Actually, the research suggests it's counter to that. It's the opposite is true. We are not predetermined by genetics or our doctor and their training in our local context. We have a huge scope of influence and control on our overall health. So as an individual, this is fantastic. And it also means that as people that provide and operate these spaces, our physical and our social environments, whether you're an employer or whether you're a designer of a building, we have a huge role to play in making sure those spaces are supporting people and their health, making those good decisions that will impact them going forward. In terms of the guidance and the process by which we engage with industry to drive this transformation, the first version of the WELL Building Standard was launched in 2014. It was optimized for commercial offices, so it began in the workplace context to really start thinking what can an employer and an office setting do to support employee health and well-being. We evolved that to start thinking outside the building in 2017 with the launch of the Community Standard, which looks at spaces in between buildings and the wider master planning community context. And in 2018, last year, we launched version 2. So along this journey, we've had a huge amount of feedback and engagement from our early adopters. We have been able to bundle and synthesize all of that fantastic feedback and lessons learned into the new version of WELL, which is a pilot we're going to be talking through today. As we were digging into the research and starting to compile these new benchmarks and tools, it became clear very quickly that this isn't purely a design activity. It's not something that a client can say, yes, I'd like a healthy space, and then appoint a team to go away and deliver that in isolation. It really starts looking at this as a holistic, integrated picture across the design of the space, the physicality of it, the operations, how it is maintained and kept running in an ongoing way, and the individual behaviors that are instilling in that space. So what is the workplace culture like? What is it that's developing in terms of social networks between occupants of that space, and how is that influencing behaviors and outcomes as well? So with that kind of broad scene setting, I'm going to pass over to Mona now, who's going to take you through WELL version 2 as a tool and the specific concept categories and requirements that it starts looking at. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Not perfect. Thank you. It's really weird because I can't hear myself. Okay, so I am going to talk you through the 10 different concepts of the WELL Building Standard version 2. And we are looking at air quality, water quality, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sound, materials, mind and community. And I'm going to talk through each of those individually to give you an idea of what these are about, why we're talking about these, and to give you some examples of features in each concept. Starting off with the air concept. In 2014, about 92% of the world's population lived in communities that where the ambient air quality didn't meet the guidelines of the World Health Organization. And this picture might be a little bit extreme when you think about London, but London has quite a bad outer air quality, and this topic has been in the news quite a bit. But as Vicky said early on, how much time are we actually spending outdoors? And I want you to think about maybe today as an example. Hands up for everyone who thinks is going to spend half an hour outdoors today. Okay. Keep your hands up for 1 hour. Keep your hands up for an hour and a half. We have 2 hands up. 2 hours. 2.5. You're doing very good over there. So if you think about it, if you spend 2.4 hours a day on average outdoors, it means that you spend 90% of your time indoors. So that 90% is even quite ambitious for us. And unfortunately, studies have shown that common air contaminants can be 2 to 5 times higher indoors compared to outdoors. So look, the WELL Building Standard is really focusing on indoor air quality. And this graph here shows the common aspects that influence indoor air quality. So So when I start at the top right, we're looking at outdoor air pollutants. So bringing those outdoor air pollutants into your buildings through either natural ventilation, technically just opening your windows, or through your mechanical ventilation system. Looking at cigarette smoke, which has over 4,000 chemicals, cleaning products that have chemicals in it, carbon monoxide fumes, gases that are naturally occurring in the ground like radon and get into your buildings through kind of cracks in the foundation, chemical fumes from paints and solvents, combustion gases from fireplaces, stoves, or just gas-fired cooking, animal hair, mold and bacteria, and the last aspect, chemicals from modern building furniture. So these are all different aspects that influence the indoor air quality, and these are addressed by the WELL building standard. So looking at a future example, and for those of you who are not familiar with the WELL building standard, each concept has preconditions and optimizations. Preconditions, you can see it's marked on the top right here as a precondition. It means that it's a minimum requirement, so every WELL certified building needs to meet this requirement. Optimizations then are options that you can choose from. You can get a certain number of points for different optimizations, and depending on the number of points you achieve, you can get then WELL silver, gold, or platinum. But this is our first feature. It's a precondition, which means that we are testing for particulate matter, organic gases, inorganic gases, and radon. So every WELL certified building will go through a on-site testing process. Another feature, like Vicky said, smoking is still one of the big health issues, in particular in the UK. So we're looking at prohibit smoking indoors as well as outdoors, and also prohibiting the use of e-cigarettes. Another future example is ventilation effectiveness. So this looks at providing sufficient fresh air to each of the rooms. And we're focusing in particular on rooms like small, densely occupied meeting rooms. And I'm pretty sure you've all experienced a room where it's not working very well, where you have a lot of people there, the air gets stuffy, you get tired, the CO2 levels rise, and you're just losing concentration. So by looking at design ventilation levels, this is something we want to tackle. Another optimization we're looking at, so this is kind of an option you can choose from, is looking at the indoor air quality on a continuous basis. And I want to pick back up on the stats that Vicky showed at the start of the presentation. Just kind of highlighted with the stars which of the modifiable risk factors we're addressing with each concept. So here we're directly addressing smoking, ambient particulate matter, and secondhand smoking. Moving then on to the next concept. I always like to talk about the materials concept right after the air concept, just because the materials are influencing the indoor air quality. And you can see that we're addressing one of the modified risk factors, which is occupational asbestos. And to be honest, when I looked at the stats first, I was quite surprised to still find this up so high. So it proves more and more that it's still something we really need to look out for. So when you're looking at a WELL building, you're required to look at asbestos, limiting mercury, limiting the use of lead, particularly if you have an existing building that's undergoing renovation. We're also looking at things like outdoor structures. So if you, for example, have a playground outside your building, making sure that there are only healthy materials and paints used as part of the playground. We're looking at pesticide use. So as soon as you have greenery, either on your balcony or outside, making sure that there are less harmful pesticides that you use, or the pesticides are managed in a healthy way. We're looking at cleaning products and protocols. So some of the cleaning products that are used on a common basis can be quite harmful and can have quite a lot of chemicals. But we're also looking at more practical aspects. So for example, if you think about your typical office building that you work in on a day-to-day basis, if you think about what surface in that building will get touched most of the times by the most amount of people. Just think about it in your head. I don't want to run around with the microphone now. But I'm pretty sure most of you would think it's the door handle. Would you agree with that? And do you think that the door handle is the one surface that's actually cleaned most amount of times by the cleaning vendor? No, I can see your head shaking. So these are the kind of the gaps that we're trying to close, looking at cleaning protocols. Moving on to the next feature, we are also looking at volatile organic compounds. So these are chemicals that off-gas in materials such as furniture, carpets, paints, adhesives, sealants, ceiling tiles. The list is quite long, and making sure that the materials that we bring into our building are not harmful. Okay. Moving on to the water concept. In the water concept, we are trying to address kind of two aspects. One is dehydration, and the other one is the quality of drinking water. Dehydration is a really important topic because studies have shown that being dehydrated by just a really small percent impacts cognitive performance. And the Institute of Medicine recommends that we actually, I personally think, need to drink quite a lot. 2.7 liters for women and 3.7 liters for men. So I think I'm certainly struggling to drink enough and meet those requirements. So the other aspect we're looking at in the water concept is the drinking water quality. So in countries like the UK and most countries in Europe, we do have quite a good quality check on water, but the problem that we're seeing is that it happens when the water leaves the water treatment facility. What actually happens between the water treatment facility and when you get the water out of your tap is a lot of the times unknown. So we are focusing on testing water quality at your drinking water tap, which is part of the on-site testing that every well-certified building needs to undergo. So this is feature W01, which is looking at testing for sediment thresholds, microorganism, and then we are moving on to the second feature in the water concept. The list that we're testing for is quite long, looking to dissolved metals, organic pollutants, disinfectant byproducts, herbicide, pesticides, fertilizer, public water additives. And one of the other things you can actually test for is the quality of drinking water. So there are certain parameters in the water that define how drinking water tastes. So as part of an optimization, you can look at making sure that your drinking water actually tastes good, which brings us back to trying to get people be more hydrated. Another optimization we are looking at is water quality consistency, so making sure that the water quality is checked on a quarterly basis in your building. And last but not least, promoting drinking water. So if you think about an office building as an example, we are looking at making sure that there's sufficient water hydration stations in the building. So people don't need to walk too far to fill up their water bottle. Moving then on to the nourishment concept. The last time I gave this presentation was actually a lunchtime talk, and literally as I had the slide up, the dessert was brought in. So I'm really glad this is not happening right now. But over half of the world's adult population is either overweight or obese, and poor nutrition is a major contributor to diseases that could be prevented, such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or obesity. And if we go back to the modifiable health risk factors, there are quite a lot of them that we are addressing with the nourishment, the nourishment concept. So we're looking at high blood pressure, high body mass index, low whole grains, low fruit, low vegetables, and low fiber. And high sugar consumption is still very problematic. I don't know about London, but when I'm based over in Dublin, and when you walk through Dublin city centre, within 10 minutes you probably walk at least past 5 donut shops. It's no joke. It's absolutely tricky not to eat lots of donuts when you live in Dublin. And habits are really triggered by environmental clues. So with the nourishment concept, we are trying to bring more fruit and vegetables as part of the food offer. We are looking at nutritional transparency so that when you go into your canteen the next time and you order your main course, you actually know, okay, how much calorie does it have, how much macro and micronutrient does the meal have, so that when you decide, okay, I actually want to look into what I'm eating, that you have the information to do so. And it's actually really surprising that as soon as we kind of stop cooking at home, we really don't have much information about what is in the food we're eating. We're looking at refined ingredients, so making sure that the total amount of sugars in meals is limited. We're looking at promoting whole grains and avoiding dangerous oils. Looking at food advertising, coming back to the example of the donut shops in Dublin, so you're not allowed to advertise for donuts in your building. Looking at artificial ingredients, restricting them and labeling them. Looking at portion sizes, so making sure that your kind of plate sizes and bowl sizes are not too big, so portion sizes can be controlled. And as the last example, we're looking at mindful eating spaces, so providing sufficient space within the building for everyone to have lunch together, so that people are not inclined to eat the lunch at their desk. Moving then on to the next concept, which is lighting. And our eyes do more than just see. I think there's so much interesting research in the lighting concept. It's certainly one of my favorite concepts. And the next few slides I have borrowed from a lighting designer in Europe. I really, really like those slides because I think they put it down to a point. So I want to bring, in the next 4 or 5 slides, I want to bring you back on a journey on how we evolved. So thinking about 80 million years ago, we were possibly surrounded by daylight and daylight only. And eventually we invented the fire. And in the evening before bed, we might have been surrounded by fire. And in the nighttime, complete darkness. Then eventually, millions of years later, we started to build buildings, and those buildings were built to have daylight within them. So as you can see, maybe not so much from the back, but as an example here on the picture, this office was built so that the window sizes, the floor to ceiling height, the room depth was optimal for daylight conditions. So then at that time we were surrounded by daylight throughout the daytime. In the evening before bed, if we were really lucky, we had a petroleum lamp, and then nighttime, again, complete darkness. Then we invented electricity, and electricity became cheap. And office design changed from being designed to have daylight to have artificial light, because we're not reliant on daylight anymore. So then we changed to maybe being surrounded by artificial light throughout the day, in the evening before bed, more artificial light, in the nighttime, most of the times, darkness again. And what are we doing today? We are surrounded by artificial light most of the day. So in December or January, we can go even for several days, leaving our house in darkness, coming to the office. If we don't get out at lunchtime for a quick walk, we come back home the night. We're more artificial light before bed, and when we're in bed, we're looking at our phones, we're looking at our laptops. So if we put this on a time scale, for 80 million years, we were surrounded by daylight and daylight only. And only in the last 60 years, we completely shifted being surrounded by artificial light. So the question is, how does that influence our health and well-being, and how are we going to design daylight? How are we going to design our buildings in the future? And the obvious answer is maximize daylight, because studies have shown that lighting really influences our human body clock, our circadian rhythm. So some of the features we are trying to address this. The first one is making sure that there's sufficient daylight within your building. We're looking also at more practical aspects, such as visual lighting design, so just making sure that you have sufficient light, for example, at your desk to work. We're looking at circadian lighting design, so this is coming back to your body rhythm. So if you don't have sufficient daylight in your building, what you can do as an alternative method is to actually mimic the shift in color temperature outside from this like blue light in the morning to the more red light in the evening. And you can mimic that by using artificial light. So this is one of the kind of options out there. We're looking at more practical aspects such as glare control and electrical lighting quality, which includes, looking at color rendering index and managing flicker. Moving then on to the next concept, which is movement. This graph here shows the prevalence of insufficient physical activity. It's a graph study by the World Health Organization that looks at how many percentage of people in a country don't meet the physical activity guidelines by the World Health Organization. And I'm afraid the United Kingdom is quite red. They're over 60%. And it's not really a surprise. Our environment and the way we are required to work, we are sitting at desks all the time. It's really hard to get the sufficient physical activity in on a day-to-day basis. And we all know the results of sitting at our desks for a whole day. We're looking at back pain, neck pain. And picking back up on the modifiable risk factors, there are a few that we're directly or indirectly addressing with this concept. And if you can see, occupational ergonomics is actually one of the modifiable risk factors, which we're addressing with the second feature. So we're looking at making sure that the screen is height adjustable, that we have height adjustable desks, and that the seats can be adjusted. We're also looking at features that look at more the design of the building. So how are people moving throughout the building? Is it by lifts, or do we have the stair core like this where people are more inclined to take the stair core to move throughout the building? Another feature is looking at active commuter support, so having the facilities there, bike parking, shower facilities and locker rooms for people to cycle or run to work. Another optimization is looking at active furniture, so looking at treadmill desks or bicycle desks. And another option to achieve points in the movement section is by providing a gym space and equipment in your building. And last but not least, we're looking at exterior active design, if you have external spaces as part of your building. Moving then on to thermal comfort. And in the thermal comfort section, we're really focusing on optimal design of your HVAC system. And as I mentioned at the start, for the air concept and the water concept, testing on site is something that we really focus on. And we're also taking testing for lighting levels, which I forgot to mention. We're also testing for thermal comfort. So as part of the World certification, the building will be tested for temperature, humidity, and airspeed. We're also looking at aspects such as thermal zoning, ensuring that occupants have sufficient control over their thermal environment, and looking at simple things like providing blankets or fans for people. So, because we don't really feel comfortable at the same temperature, that's just the fact. And we are looking at providing radiant heating or cooling, and second last feature, always providing an optimization for continuously monitoring of your thermal comfort environment, and last feature, looking at humidity control. Moving then on to sound, and sound is very similar to thermal comfort. We are looking at an optimal design strategy here. Looking at your building, where are the loud and the quiet areas in your building, making sure that the HVAC noise is not too loud, looking at sound barriers. I attended a training for the on-site testing there in January, and as part of this feature will also be tested on site. So how it's tested, you're actually in the room and you're popping a balloon and someone stands outside and measures how much of that noise gets through the sound barrier. I think that's quite cool. And then we're looking at sound absorption, so looking at how much surfaces is there that absorbs sounds in the rooms. Okay, second last concept, mind. And now we're moving a little bit from design and operational aspects into kind of more HR policy side. And again, we're tackling a few of the modifiable risk factors here in the mind concept. In version 2, we're really looking at a focus on mental health. So we have a feature for mental health promotion, a feature for mental health support, a feature for mental health education. One of the other features we're looking at is access to nature. This is actually one of my favorite features. In version 1, it was called biophilia. If you want to learn more about this, there's so many interesting studies and research on this topic. And there's a talk at 1:30, I think. Check, I wrote it down. Yes, 1:30, right here on biophilia in the office place. There's some really, really inspiring speakers, so drop by if you're interested. We're looking at features such as stress support, business travel policies. So if you are taking an overnight flight to the US, you're not required to straight go into the office. We're looking at helping people to stop smoking. We have a feature for substance use, education and services, which brings me over to the last concept, which is community. In the community concept, the first feature is looking at health and wellness awareness. So if your building is well certified, making sure you tell your employees, okay, what features did we tackle, why did we tackle them, and providing more reading material for people if they're interested to look into the detail. We are asking well-certified buildings to do an annual occupant survey, and we are looking at things like health promotion, that the employer provides a health risk assessment, employer provides the annual flu shot for employees. We're looking at features such as new parent support, new mother support, which includes breastfeeding support, lactation rooms, and education around breastfeeding. Looking at family support, civic engagement, which is giving employees a certain time in the year off to do charity work. This is one of the kind of more designed features in the community standard, which is requiring to design for disabled access in your building, and a feature looking at emergency preparedness, so looking at developing an emergency plan, who is responsible, what is happening in an emergency, and last but not least, providing community space as an optimization. That's all the different 10 concepts of the Well Building Standard, version 2, and I'm going to hand back to Vicky to talk about key enhancements of Well version 2.
Thank you, Mona, for that great run-through of the concepts and the different topics, how we tackle these issues and translate it into action for teams. So just to kind of synthesize, thinking back to that evolution of the WELL program, version 1 that we launched in 2014 to now version 2 that came out last year, I'm going to summarize what the key differences are and how to characterize that program. So the first key differentiator of version 2 is that it is a single system for all different project typologies. So previously we had a version 1 that was geared towards offices, and we had a number of different pilots for education or retail spaces or restaurants, different building functions. What we've done now in how the system actually operates is collate together the digital library of these interventions and strategies, and then each project can enter and define which parameters relate and make sense for their particular project circumstances. So under each feature, it will tell you what space type and usage they apply to, and you can build up your scorecard for each project in a really dynamic way. That means you can tackle a mixed-use building, you can look at a residential project, or you can look at an industrial warehouse facility, all through the same portal and process. So this is super exciting for us. This is taking the health discussion beyond the workplace and really starting to think about the breadth of interior environments where people are occupying and inhabiting. Second big shuffle that we had as part of that flexibility and enabling all these different project typologies to come in and start using the program, we recognize that we have to readjust what is mandatory that all projects have to meet versus which are these pick and choose optional strategies. We call those preconditions, must meet, and optimizations, the pick and choose ones. So we have fewer preconditions in version 2, but many more optimizations, a much broader category of different strategies that you pick and choose and tailor to your project. It's also worth pointing out here, under each feature, which is generally kind of thematically organized, there can be multiple different parts, and each part has a point allocation, and you can target parts independently of one another. So you don't have to complete every single strategy that relates to championing more movement or great workplace ergonomics. You might pick and choose the elements that make most sense for your project and circumstance. Other big shift we had is to now apply a points-based system to the benchmark and the standard. So similar to other certification programs, we had these 3 different tiers of attainment. You can be WELL Silver certified, Gold, or Platinum as your tiers, and you reach those benchmarks based on the number of points that you collect through the optimization strategies. We also recognize that projects, to be fully certified, have to go through this on-site performance testing element that Mona's been talking about. So there will be someone coming to site to physically inspect and verify the air quality, the lighting performance, the acoustic performance, and the water quality. That means we want to give projects some kind of interim step. If there's different pressures on timeline, or you want to know that you're on the right track to meet those goals as you're going down that journey, then WELL D&O, WELL Design and Operations, is an interim designation. So similar to BREEAM and the design stage interim certificate, or LEED has pre-certification, this is our halfway marker, which enables projects to verify and then publicly market that they are on track for a particular target and strategy. And then, as Mona mentioned, we have this big verified performance. This is, and always has been, a real cornerstone of our program. It's something we are really passionate in ensuring stays part of WELL, because this is the difference between having great intentions and hoping that you meet something versus actually verifying that you have delivered it. So that remains part of the program as it always has. The big difference in version 2 is that the entity that can conduct that on-site performance testing exercise has broadened. So previously this was only conducted by our third-party certification partner, which is GBCI, the same body that certify LEED projects and many other benchmarks and systems. When they are now rolling out a program of trainings to enable people in industry to offer that service to WELL projects. So it means that each project has the choice of who they appoint to complete that performance testing. That's obviously fantastic as we scale globally. It's not possible for GBCI to service an entire global portfolio of projects from a single base. So it means local markets are now empowered and getting skilled and trained in this operational performance testing of spaces, which we're hoping becomes a more habitual exercise that are conducted across all different projects, whether you're certifying under WELL or not. Another big resource that was launched last month, was the crosswalks. So these documents start to chart where environmental benchmarks, BREEAM, LEED, RESET and Green Star, overlap with our criteria within WELL and the human performance aspects. And it makes that process of dual certification more streamlined. So it will highlight if you've achieved this particular feature or credit in another scheme that meets this particular WELL feature, and it means you as the project team only focus on those additional areas that are going above and beyond or that are entirely new and novel areas for the health and well-being side of things. One big initiative that we've been developing over the last 12 months as well is to start thinking beyond the building. So we talked about, we had a kind of journey, individual asset level to WELL community and starting to think about spaces in between. Portfolio then starts to think about individual assets in aggregate. So if you are an investor and you're managing a portfolio of lots of different properties across different locations, or you are a single employer that has offices in many different locations servicing different populations, this process and program is going to help those parties address health and well-being strategically across the board in a kind of umbrella program. So it's starting to think about health and well-being at a strategic corporate level. In terms of the first parties that are signed up and participating in this new evolving pilot, we have a blend of corporate occupier type clients like Barclays. We have some big investment funds that have existing property portfolios that they want to kind of align and bring up to a same standard when it comes to health and well-being. And we have a number of great manufacturing partners and industry partners in specific market sectors like multifamily residential or industrial that are starting to think about health and wellness at scale in these more novel and specialist sector segments. So super exciting from our side, and if you want to learn any more about that program, do come and chat to us afterwards. We will be around this stand all 3 days. So just to wrap up our time today, we wanted to give you a bit of a kind of zoom back out. We've gone really into the detail of the building standard, what does it cover, how do you start to tackle health and well-being at a project level, and now we're going to be looking back in the global picture. What's actually happening in this movement and how is the market transforming in different parts of the globe? So in that big global perspective, very excitingly, we've just recently passed a big milestone for us. We've got over 1,500 projects that are registered and signed up with commitments to champion health and well-being in these spaces. That's over 130 million square feet, so a huge area of real estate. And then if you start thinking about that in terms of number of individuals, the power of that movement is really profound. So it's very exciting for us. And we're almost at 50 countries. So if you're working on projects which haven't yet got a registration, help us get to that benchmark. Here in Europe, the region that our team here actually looks after, we are approaching 400 projects. We have 25 fully completed and certified projects, and I would definitely encourage you to let us know if you'd like to go and tour and see some of those. All people that have come through this full certification program are really excited to tell their story and show people, let them experience what it means when you're actually there physically on the ground. So those can be really interesting tours and events. And in terms of country count here in Europe, we have grown very rapidly from a state of a few countries here in Europe to now over 20 that are engaged with projects moving forward. So it's been a really big honor and privilege to help that evolution emerge and keep that growth and momentum growing year on year. In terms of which are the countries with the biggest amount of activity, you're actually standing in our top performer in terms of Europe. So the UK has over 100 projects registered moving forward. One of the reasons for that is that we have a number of portfolio participants that have really started to look at that scale for a number of different assets altogether. We've also got France, the Netherlands and Spain in terms of big engagers and early movers in this movement, helping define the future of real estate. And then kind of trickling out from that in concentric circles, the next wave of countries where we see big movement growing rapidly is Poland, Italy, Sweden, Ireland, Hungary and Germany. So a number of different markets, all with very different contexts and drivers, but nonetheless united around this universal truth that we as human individuals need some help and support at managing our lives to be as fulfilling and as rewarding as possible. And real estate has a really important role to play in that. And then finally, I wanted to show you this graph, which is kind of our momentum as a region over the last few years. So I actually joined the IWBI team in early 2017. Previously, I was working at Arup, doing consultancy with some of the early projects moving forward in the UK. And we've grown from a state in 2015, where it was 7 projects in 3 countries, very, very early days, into now there's over 300 projects across 21 countries. So it's been a hugely exciting journey for us. I would thank you all for your engagement and interest and enthusiasm on this topic and helping shine the light on this human-centric approach to design and operational decisions. And with that, I would love to open it up for questions. So I've got my headphones on so I can now hear you, and we have a microphone. So if you've got any questions or points of feedback you want to share with the group, please put your hand up. And we'll have a bit of a discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Really interesting, Summer. Thank you very much indeed. My question is, I work with a lot of building product manufacturers, and a lot of this is about projects, but they want to understand how they can contribute in terms of their manufacturing, their products, and how they use that to contribute to the WELL standards. I wondered if there was anything in your plans to introduce that through.
It's a great question. And actually, in terms of feedback from projects that are either completed or going through this process, material sourcing and being able to find those products and solutions is a very common challenge. It's something they have to invest a lot of time and research in, and so engaging with the supply chain and the manufacturing community has been a priority on our radar for the last 12 months and will continue to be moving forward. I would definitely encourage you to go and check out the Mindful Materials Pavilion. So we've been doing some work together with Origin, which is an open source materials database, to try and help manufacturers be able to articulate what their products do and how they've been vetted against some of these material chemistry requirements that can otherwise get very complex and confusing quite quickly. And otherwise, we are working with specific manufacturers like Milliken, and Herman Miller, who've both co-sponsored this stage, and others like Shaw, who are thinking about WELL across their own showrooms and across their own product lines and research and R&D activities. So it's definitely building as a challenge and a topic in the manufacturing community, and we are very proactively trying to help them with education and kind of product literature and information to help position their products and their contribution towards these goals in the right frame. Thanks. Yeah.
Once a company has certified, how are you kind of supporting them with tracking return on investment for doing that?
Great question. So I should have said this. Our certification is valid for a 3-year period. So we know that buildings are influenced by all these different factors, and there's a number of ongoing requirements that have to be maintained to ensure that your healthy building day one is still operating as a healthy space down the line. So that's how we've built that kind of ongoing quality assurance into the program itself. In terms of the research question, we have a number of features that help guide people about those ongoing parameters that they might want to check, like ongoing water quality testing, or like the occupant survey that's gathering the feedback from users themselves. So those are 2 great kind of information sources. We also encourage projects down continuous monitoring as an ongoing window into how their space is performing and delivering for people. So those are great data sources to feed in. And then in terms of translating that into the economics and the business impact, most companies are starting to look at various HR metrics as proxies. So Cundall in London is a great example of this. They looked at absenteeism and recruitment and staff retention as factors, put some figures together about what it means for them as a business if they have to lose a member of staff and go and recruit and train up another one. And then we're able to work out their return on investment as a matter of months rather than years after they went through the certification process. So we don't prescribe a standardized approach to that research, but nearly every certified project is looking at that question because it's such an interesting and intuitive one. And I think more and more guidance about how to conduct that research in a best practice way will continue to come out. There was actually a recent webcast from our head of our head of research, Angela Loader, that's really delving into this topic. So if you come and chat with us afterwards, I can send you the link to that one. I encourage you to watch it. Any other questions before we wrap up? Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for coming along to join us today.